Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Wellness Show with Angela and Sophia. I hope you're all doing very well and had a lovely Eid, blessed Ramadan. Everybody else who's listening who were not Muslims and you're not taking part in any of this, I hope you had a nice bank holiday and you also had a nice enjoyment with the nice weather. So today it's a little bit of a special show because my dear sidekick Angela is on the other side of the pond in Canada visiting relatives and family. So hopefully she'll be able to text me some of her comments throughout the show, because obviously she cannot call in because that would be a whopping bill for her. But in the studio today we have a special guest. I mean, quite special for me because it's my husband, Lamaan Ball, and we've decided that we're going to talk about youth mental health, depression, but also false beliefs about themselves and about the world that leads, especially the youth, to think in wrong terms, and that leads them to sometimes feel depressed and confused. These are discussions we have a lot, the two of us. We are parents of 4 children who are between the ages of 14 and 21. So we have a little bit of experience. Obviously, we've not experienced everything by far, alhamdulillah, but we have a bit of experience, and we can hopefully guide you a little bit through this. And Lamaan is also director of the Public Qur'an Campaign, which aims to have the Quran in public spaces, and inshallah we'll hear more about that in the future. So Lamaan, can you just briefly introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us a bit more about your journey, because you're a bit of a hybrid, aren't you? You're a convert, revert, but born Muslim.
Yes, well, my parents converted to Islam, and they were in the process of converting to Islam as I was born. In fact, I think I was conceived directly after my father was circumcised, which he had done when he was 21 or something like that, or 22, maybe a bit older than that, I don't know exactly, but anyway, my father unfortunately died when I was 5, so I didn't really learn a lot about Islam from him. May Allah have mercy on him. And he, so I remember, the only thing I remember as far as that is I remember him being very pleased with me when I joined them in the prayers when I was like 5 once, or something like that. That was the only thing I remember about that. So I did kind of grow up with that. My mother then brought us up with a kind of awareness of everything. We were going to Sunday school with my grandmother whenever we were visiting my grandmother, and we had sort of Islam practiced in the house, and we went to go and spend sort of iftars and spend the night visiting people in Ramadan particularly. I remember those evenings. I would spend time chatting with people and making jokes through the night, not really doing much ibadah or whatever it was. And then also we were kind of part of those times. My mother was not keen on the on scouts, so we were sent to Woodcraft Folk, which is a kind of left-wing, fairly very left-wing, I would say, sort of alternative to the Scouts, which were considered a sort of right-wing youth group, relatively speaking, and that was very sort of atheist, Marxist kind of inspired thing, and of course, you know, general awareness of the culture. So I had a very mixed background. I essentially was told it was up to me to make my decisions. At the age of 13, I could do what I wanted in terms of the prayers, and I actually stopped praying at about 13, and I was not particularly into that. I did ask my mother questions. She didn't really have very good answers, unfortunately. I remember one particular time where I asked her about why does she believe, and she said it was a leap of faith. It was a leap in the dark. It's like, well, oh dear, that wasn't me. I wasn't going to do that. I was kind of that is a bad idea. That parents say at 13 you can do this, because you haven't really got the mental capacity to think these things through properly. But anyway, I did. I still carried on with things what the family was doing, and then when I got to, I think 17, my mother remarried to Abdul Halim, Muhammad Abdul Halim, now Professor Abdul Halim, who was a teacher of Arabic and is now quite well known for his translation of the Qu'ran, which. But at the time he hadn't done the translation. He was just mainly a senior lecturer in Arabic, and of course he's Egyptian, and this kind of put me in a new situation as a teenager, 17, having to kind of find my new position in this changed family where I've got 2 stepbrothers, and there was a lot of conversations. I remember long conversations going into 3 in the morning quite regularly about everything in the world. When I was about 17, 18, I did my A-levels, living with my stepfather, and there was some tense moments, as teenagers are with those situations, but essentially that's when I started to think about a lot of things. And my father, while he was alive, was a very, very keen reader. He had amassed a huge collection of books. I remember my mother saying he'd read about a book every other day.
Wow.
He would go just plough through books. He was a bit of a speed reader as well sometimes. So he actually came to Islam because he met Muslims, and then he read the Qur'an, and from reading the Qur'an he was convinced
he read them at Oxford University.
At Oxford University. Both my parents were actually studying at Oxford University. My father studied a bit more diligent studying than my mother. So, but yes, so they met there. So yes, he left a lot of books, like as a kind of. When he died, he had a lot of books, and most of those were my mother gave them to his college in Oxford. But she kept behind a kind of I don't know, maybe 50 books or something, which were most of them were related to philosophy, and she said that maybe my children will have them. So I was in a room with all these 50 odd, very carefully selected books that my mother had kept from my father, and there was all sorts of books on philosophy, and there was Bertrand Russell and John Locke and all sorts of, and I started to sort of dip into these books and start thinking, what do I really think about the world? And I remember reading a number of these books when I was about 17, 18, or at least starting them. I would usually get through about a third of them, by which time I thought, well, there's lots of ideas here, and I don't agree with the first 4, and they're building everything else on top of these, so I don't really agree with it. But I do remember reading a number of those books, and I formulated an idea then. This is a long version of the story, but anyway.
It's okay. Well, it's interesting.
So I remember formulating sort of philosophy of life, and I just called myself a decisively agnostic. At that point, I have not got enough evidence, and I cannot say yes or no or this or that. But there was so that was my position, and I thought about these things. And I thought, well, basically, life learns how to survive. That's what life is about. It's about going into the world and evolving, and we embody in our DNA, in everything that's inside of us, what life is. It's about learning how to survive, basically about learning. So I had the idea that the purpose of life is to learn, which I thought was a great kind of nice, and I was pretty convinced, and still today I'm pretty convinced that this is the way it is. I'll explain a bit more about that from a religious point of view. I would say life is a test, which is about learning, really. You're tested as to whether you seek truth or whether you're just happy with the lies that are presented to you sometimes. And that's a big part of mental health, is that. Anyway, so I eventually went to university, where I studied physics, and after the first year and then the second year I started to kind of slack off in my studies. I was just kind of enjoying myself, became a bit more hedonistic in my lifestyle, and my grades slipped significantly-ish in my second year, and I had a kind of moment. I thought, maybe I was thinking about my sort of philosophy. Okay, the purpose of life is to learn, but why should I bother? Why should I put in the effort? It'll happen whether or not I do it. So that kind of niggled away at me for a while, and eventually I can get into a bit more detail, but essentially that kind of triggered a whole process of thinking, which eventually led me to become Muslim a few months later, when I was reflecting on the nature of purpose of life.
Mm-hmm.
So I pause there.
No, it's fascinating, to be honest. I've heard that story many times, but each time you tell it, it shows how much intellectual process has been going on. A lot of us who convert to Islam, we go through that process of intellectualizing everything. Not all of us, but a lot of us, especially because and we are drawn to the Quran and to Islam because in the Quran Allah says so many times, for people who think. And that really sort of imprints in our mind, and it speaks to us, because before that we were never taught to think. So how did that compare with what the education, or the maybe a bit remote education you got from your grandparents that was Christian? Why did you then decide that Islam was relevant to you rather than maybe their vision?
All right, well, I think that the key there's a number of things that all kind of fit together. The truth is sometimes you see it from many different angles. So one explanation gives you the truth, but another explanation also gives you the same truth, but you just approach it from a different angle. I could think of many different ways that my mind kind of honed in on the truth about certain things, but
because I think it's quite important for parents who are listening to us that you may be facing a challenging teenager right now who's asking you lots of questions about Islam, or moaning about having to do certain things like a prayer maybe, or fasting, or whatever it is, and you struggle to maybe understand even why they're questioning this, and listening to Lamaan maybe can help you a bit to honing a little bit on their brain.
Anyway, so I was thinking about this. I was thinking why should I do anything? Why, if I'm purpose of life is to learn, but I'm not bothering, so why now? Why should I bother? And then it's kind of this idea that purpose is about the future. Purpose is about setting your goals in life and working towards them, and it's about what should be. You're trying to say what should be happening in your life, and one of the problems in philosophy, they call it what the is ought problem. It's like you can say things are, but how can you infer that things ought to be in a particular state? And it's a tough thing because you can't kind of reason like that, and most of reasoning's about the way things are, not the way things should be. But I remember thinking about this. If there's anything that ought to be, if there's any purpose, then my life can have purpose. But if there is no purpose to life, or existence, whatever. So what if life has purpose? What happens at the end of the universe? The universe might fade into non-existence, and then life's gone, and what's been achieved? So what's good about that? And even that is just a description of what is, not what ought to be. Life is learning. Does that ought to be happening? What's going on? So the idea then, that basically kind of settled on this notion that if there is anything, if you're part of a system in which there is no purpose, you say there's no purpose to existence, then your part of it is part of achieving nothing, which is quite a dramatic thing to say. I'm achieving nothing. My life achieves nothing. I'm not doing anything with my life. My life is going nowhere because the whole universe is going nowhere. There's no purpose. I mean, it's a hypothesis to start with, but if you take on the idea, if you accept that idea, that's a false belief. We talked a bit about it. Once you take on that idea, on what basis? What evidence do you have for that? Just making such an assertion, such a brazen assertion, with no evidence. You're making an assertion about the entire existence of the universe when you see such a tiny part of it, but people do. But if you say that, then you're merely part of nothing. You're merely part of achieving nothing. And so this kind of idea.
And also I find that people who quote this, or who believe this sort of things, they tend to quote the top scientists that we hear about, Einstein and everything, but they don't go as far as realizing that these scientists actually ended up saying, well, I can't really say there's no creator.
Yeah, they don't know, and most scientists actually, one of the things you rarely hear, the public perception is scientists, they've studied things, they know so much, we must follow their ideas, follow their notions. But the reality is, most scientists study something in a very, very narrow area, and if you actually go and try and ask them questions about proper science, not just general opinions, they'll say, I don't know, it's not my area 99.999% of the time, because that's not, they have a very specific area they work in. Now there are people like the Brian Coxes of this world whose job is public awareness of science, and so they are generalists and not and they don't necessarily have quite the level of specific knowledge, and they are there to talk to the public, so it's hard for them to say, I don't know. But in professional settings, they'll be asked questions about things. They'll say, well, it's not an area I've researched, so they'll just kind of,
they're not keen to,
they abstain from making strong opinions about things. But still, a lot of people do have lots of strong opinions that are not in areas they've looked at. And we should, I don't know if we've made that medical disclaimer here before we talk about anything.
Yes, that's now that we're moving on to a bit more the meaty subject of mental health and everything. Just remind you, we always have that little disclaimer that everything we say here is really just our opinion, and it's not meant to be a diagnosis or to treat or cure anything. If you have any doubt whatsoever about your mental state or your physical state, do consult a medical professional. This is just to give you pointers, ideas, maybe things to explore, to think about, and expose you to new ideas and make you aware. But please do not take this as any advice for you to do, particularly whatsoever. Not
any advice you take without consulting your doctor about them, or if you have any need to speak to a doctor, don't take us as doctors, basically.
We're not
doctors. But we have our own experiences, and I have various experiences. When it gets to so basically, when you come into this is the idea that if there is no purpose to existence, then there's no purpose to my life, and therefore nothing I can do achieves anything. That's a sort of nihilistic, necessary, logical conclusion from that assertion. So then I said, well, if there is purpose to life, then my life can have purpose, and then I can have something I can achieve. Then there's something valuable in my life and something I can do with my life, and therefore the sense of purpose is there. So the question then is, if there is purpose to existence, in some fact, purpose to life and purpose to my life, what's the basic thing what's the first most important principle of that the way the universe works in that way? And it should be that if it has direct personal consequences to me, and it's personal to my life, then it must have direct consequences on my life if I go towards that purpose or away from that purpose. If I go towards that purpose, then there's benefit, and if I go away from it, then there's harm. But that then also brings into the question of, well, what happens to people who go against it, fight against it? Well, you have people who do something bad and live bad lives. Is there a consequence after death? Because I have this hard idea, you can get away with crimes, you can get away with your sins, your moral crimes against God's will. If you think about it like this, you start thinking in these terms. So, but in terms of, if you fight against the purpose of existence, fight against the purpose of your life, then there are consequences, and they can't really be limited to your life. So if there's anything that ought to happen, there ought to be justice, there ought to be consequences for people who deliberately do terrible crimes against the purpose, against what is the purpose of life and your purpose in life. So if there is consequence to if there is purpose in life, then there needs to be justice, and that cannot be limited to our direct living experiences, because people die and the consequences haven't reached them yet of some terrible crime they did. They got away with it. We think about maybe Jimmy Savile. How many people, how many kids did he rape? How many terrible things? And he died, and he never faced a single day in prison.
Yeah. And
he lived the high life. I mean, he was in the having Christmas parties with the Prime Minister every year for years and years and years, and up with the absolute top of society in the UK, and never suffered any consequences to his actions in this life.
Yeah.
So the point is that justice requires there's justice beyond this life. And once I kind of got that in my head, if there's purpose, there has to be justice, and if there's justice, there has to be judgment beyond this life, and it also has to be perfect judgment, and it has to be so all of that implies there must be a perfect judge. There must be, and so from that point there must be God. And at that point then I looked, and I had already known, because I've been to the Sunday school and I've been to this place and that place, and I looked at the various things, and I said, well, okay, I know Christianity's too paradox laden, it's too confusing, it's got things wrong with it, doesn't make sense. I know about Islam, I know about other religions to some extent, and I think I'll give Islam a try. So I'll have a look at it again. So I know I believe in God, let me find out. So I said I'd get hold of, so I kind of decided at that point I would become Muslim, and I went various things. I got hold of a copy of the Qur'an, and so I'm going to read this, because this is the non-negotiable bit of being a Muslim, really. You know, you have to accept the Qur'an, and okay, you might have different understandings of particular verses from other people, but essentially you have to accept that text, that is the word of God, and it's, you know, to accept that is quite a big thing, and you have to know it. So I said that provisionally I accept it, but I will need to read through the Quran and see if there's anything in there that is just so completely I can't accept. Like, I'd read lots of these philosophy books and whatever, and I'd read through all these things, and sort of, at least I'd started them, and I got to a point where I don't agree with that. But then they kind of build everything on top of that. So, my experience actually of the Quran before that, I had some which I just relate back, because it actually relates to the fact that I wasn't really open to listen to what the Quran had to say before, and what had happened. I remember when I was 17, I was looking through these philosophy books. Of course, there was a Quran in the house. I picked up the Quran and I started to read it, and it said, and I was kind of expecting, well, this is like 1400 years old. It's probably going to be full of references to, I don't know, the particular historical context it was set in, and so on and so on, and very parochial, and, you know, like so for example in Christianity it's all about Jesus came to man, and God became a Jesus, and there are three, you know, the whole Trinity thing, and to me that's like, the universe is so huge. Are we alone in the universe? No, can't be. You know, and the idea that God would choose us, and he's a triune God where one part happens to be a particular human who lived, you know, and incarnated as a particular single human 2,000 years ago. It's like, no, that doesn't make sense. That's very anthropomorphic. It's putting humans at the center of everything. And, you know, there are, how many worlds are there out there, and all this. So when I read the Quran, I opened the Quran, and I remember reading the first line, and it said, "Praise be to God, Lord of all the worlds." I thought, oh wow.
Because it's plural. Because it's plural.
So it's like, it's already not talking about this world, it's talking about all the worlds. It's like, oh wow.
So it could be the worlds, like
I had to stop and think about that. Close the Quran, and unfortunately I didn't really open it up again.
Yeah.
It was like, it was not that I had disagreed with it. I was just like, I had agreed so much with the first line, I couldn't think so much beyond that, and I was like, that's too much to think about now, and I want to think for myself. As part of that is part of the idea that you can think for yourself so much better when you're not having everyone telling you what to think, and that's a big part of the sort of teenage mind, is to try and think for yourself. It's very egotistical, but I think that's part of being a teenager. You have to form your identity, you have to form your ideas of who you are and what you are, and that's a very key part of growing up. So we, as more elderly adults, say, well, not elders yet, but elders compared to others, that we tend to forget just how, as a growing teenager, a lot of your focus is your identity, and who are you, and how, what is this about you that is not your parents, you know.
So before we continue to talk, like delve now into a bit more deeply into the teenage brain, which is quite a big task in itself, we're going to take a short break, and we will resume in a couple of minutes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and we're back on the Wellness Show, and today I am talking to my husband Lamaan Ball. We are parents of 4 children, teenagers and young adults, and we are looking at, Lamaan was telling us about his process of discovering Islam, and the mental, intellectual journey he went through to reach that point. And Angela has a question. Angela is reminding you she's in Canada at the moment, so it's a bit complicated for her to call in and speak to us. So she's sending me her comments and questions, and I'm reading them on her behalf. So she has a question, Lamaan. She would like you to tell us, maybe it's now is the right point to ask, or maybe later, but what tips would you give parents to encourage this inquisitiveness that you had naturally to our children?
I think inquisitiveness comes from confidence, strangely. There's a thing, okay, there's a difference between arrogance and confidence, but the two are very closely related sometimes. When you're so if you I think confidence is the opposite of depression. We're going to get into the issue about this essentially. Yes. So if you characterize depression by the phrase "I can't," and the opposite of that is "I can." So telling your children they can do things and encouraging them to say you can do anything, you can achieve anything, you can go, give them the confidence that you can do things. Then they will start thinking, oh well, what can I do? I could do this. Maybe I should look into this. Maybe so. Giving your children confidence by telling them you believe in them, that they can do things.
So that can start very early on when they're very little,
yes.
Even just starting to grab something in their hands, at babies, and you don't just do it for them, or they start walking and you just say, no, you can, come, I trust you, I believe in you, and picking them up when they fall if needed, but kind of always having trust that they
mostly,
can.
That ability. If you so it's about confidence and mental health to go together, but there's a sort of the flip side of confidence is arrogance, and it's a very interesting thing to kind of explore as a kind of how things work like this. So we talked about, and so as a teenager, you're starting to have this sense of identity separate from just I'm a child of my parents and I want to make decisions for myself, and that's a particular part of growing up, that you need to make decisions for yourself. That means if your parents tell you what to do, it's no longer your decision. I was just an example yesterday. I was thinking about when one of my children told another of my children that they had to go and do something, and they said, I was just about to do that, but now you've said that, I'm just going to sit here. Because it's not their decision now, it's your decision. So parents have to kind of to quote that song, let it go. You can't be telling kids what to do all the time. You have to let them make decisions for themselves, because they're going to have to learn to be without you, and that's part of developmental growth. They need to learn to make decisions without you, and that's largely where this whole idea of teenage rebellion comes from. It's that teenagers know, and it's deep unconscious, this is behavior built into their DNA really, that they have to learn how to cope and make decisions on their own without you. They might come to you for advice, but they would go to other people as well, and that they know that they can do without you, and their decisions and their mental processes are not dependent on you. They have to be free to make decisions themselves.
Yeah, I think it's quite important. Sometimes you see children that are extremely compliant and they would never utter a word against their parents or whatever, and I wonder sometimes if how they are coping with this because they naturally need to have something they can resist, so they can explore their own ideas. So if you don't have that really good communication line with your children, then they may end up getting that knowledge or advice from their peers who are as confused as themselves.
I mean, a lot of things, the way the culture in this country in particular works, but it's just widely, is that people will tend to they look to what's around them, and if they're spending all their time in school, then all their time around other people the same age, that's where they get their information from, and that's what they think. It's like we sometimes judge that. It's natural. We would judge things by the information that's easily accessible to us. So unfortunately, that's a very big problem now, because so much information is easily available to us. It's a huge deluge of information across the whole world now. It's not just your senses and the people around you. It's the whole world now. You can see, some minor injustice happens in in some small village in China, and it goes on YouTube, goes viral, and then suddenly everyone knows about it. In the past it wouldn't affect anybody, now it can traumatize everyone around the world of something that has really no direct impact on their life normally, but this deluge of information is a big problem now with people. But I wanted to go back into the idea of identity, and as a teenager you're developing this identity, and it's a very big part of politics now. I talk about identity politics, and so it's a big part of what's going on is about identity. So when you say I am this or I am that, what does that really mean? And as a teenager you have to kind of say I am this, I am that, I'm this, I'm this kind of person or that kind of person, and people label each other all the way. They're trying to categorize each other a lot of the time, and it can become quite toxic, this whole labeling process. From an Islamic point of view, the basic thing here is that in a sense you are what you do. Okay, every Arabic noun is based off a verb which has an action that you have to do the action to become the thing, and you can choose to do all sorts of actions, and broadly speaking, I think a lot of mental health in particular is around how you think about yourself and your identity, and about your decision-making ability. So this confidence comes from, you're confident that your decision-making process is okay, is good, is sound. And if you start to question your own decision-making process, I can't think about this, I don't know, I don't trust myself, that's when you kind of stop. Because if you think you can't do something, then you don't try to do it, and then that lack of doing it proves to yourself that you can't do it, and it just feeds itself. There are certain feedback systems. Okay, this is so this if you do things then and you succeed in them, and people say that's great, then you think, oh, I'm good at this, and you do more of it and become good at it, and you do more, and people like it, and it feeds itself back, and you become good at that thing, and that's a virtuous cycle. And you can, that's how every talent, every competence we build up is like that. But in the other, there's a vicious cycle that goes with every virtuous cycle. Is the less you put effort into something, the worse you are at it, and then people say, oh, you're no good at this subject because you haven't put the time in, and because you haven't put the time in, and you think, oh, I'm not good at it, you don't put the time in, and you put less time in and less time and less time, and you neglect that part of your potential, if you like. But there's everyone has these potentials, but they have to realize it takes time. You have to put time into something. You have to generate that virtuous cycle of doing something that's beneficial, getting the rewards of that, and then wanting to do more of it, and then because you do more you get more rewards, and so on and so on, and it feeds itself. So there's lots of these cycles in identity, and a large part of what I think goes wrong with mental health is people get into a cycle of self-destructive behavior, and it's like, I can't do this, therefore I don't do this. I mean, when you look at, so in terms of mental health particularly, there's some kind of family experience. I know in before I was born, I mean, my great-grandfather or something committed suicide, and my family been talking about, they discovered how recently, and it was quite gruesome. I can't remember, I don't even know his name, but anyway, there's also my grandma had some bouts of depression, and my father also somewhat, and I wanted to know, because I knew about this a bit in my family history. I thought, okay, well, I want to understand this issue, and I understand why people do these things. So I did focus a lot on this, and I remember a kind of penny dropping in a particular moment at university when I was feeling kind of down, and I thought, I know what makes me happy. I'm going to go and spend some time with my friends, and I just chat and watch some TV or whatever, just be a bit more social, because I was feeling lonely, and that was what was making me sad or whatever. So I knew that this would cheer me up. So I went downstairs and started chatting with my friends and watched some TV with them, and at a certain point I realized, actually this is making me feel worse, because I now realize that I should be doing something else. I should be doing my studies, I should be doing my revision, and I wasn't. And I realized that there's a cycle, And once you realise that cycle, and it's a real penny dropping. So what was happening was, I was feeling unhappy, partly, well, you have lots of different reasons why you feel unhappy. But I was feeling unhappy partly because I hadn't done the work I needed to do. And I was feeling a bit overwhelmed by it. I was like, I'm not doing enough work, I have to do more, I need to get this, it's not working for me. So I thought, okay. And then what I did to cure this feeling of unhappiness was to do less work. All right, I was spending more time just socializing instead of getting the work done. And when I did that, I realized that I was taking essentially a poison as a medicine. And that I think is very crucial. If we the nature of these cycles is, if you think in your head something, this is a medicine, and you take it, and it makes you feel worse, and then you say, well, I need more medicine, that drives you down further and further and further and further. Because the basic false belief you have there is that this thing you're doing helps you when it actually harms you. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that drives people into these bad states, is they take somewhere in the diagnostic that they apply to themselves, their self-medication, the way they deal with their problems, they take something as a treatment that is actually a poison. And I think this is absolutely critical, and it connects up with things like drugs as well. But basically, all these addictions are a form of false self-medication. There's a very interesting study about addiction, which is very closely related to mental health. And it goes back, I remember reading this as by an article that was describing this by Johann Hari of The Guardian. And he has experience with his friends, shall we say, who have drug addictions and things like that. And so he looked into this. Essentially, there was a study back, I think in the 70s, where they put a rat in a cage, and they gave it 2 bottles of water, one with cocaine, one without. And the rat tasted both, and then just liked the cocaine one, and had more and more and more of it until it died of an overdose. And that was proof of the dangerous addictive capacity of cocaine, you know. This is what they were. That was the edict that came down. And then some years later, someone decided this is not a proper experiment, because the rat essentially is being put in solitary confinement in a very unhealthy environment for rats, and they're very stressed out. And he thought, well, let's try a proper experiment where they've got the rat in a perfect rat condition. So they set up the rat with a load of tunnels, other rats to have friends with and have partners with, and basically a full kind of rat life in there as they would like to live. And they set them up in that environment, and then they gave them the 2 bottles. They tasted the one with the cocaine once, and they never went back to it.
So fascinating.
And so this is very important. So what the rat was doing was treating itself for its emotional stress,
self-soothing
by this self-medication. And as it got, as it went on, and even they took rats who had been put in a solitary confinement sort of stress case situation, had become totally addicted onto the cocaine water, and then they moved them into the ideal rat environment, and very soon they stopped using the cocaine. They did no need for it anymore, because you have the need. So essentially all these things, all these addictions, are a form of false self-medication, and we need to fix them by finding the real cure to it. And it's often a social problem. It's often a problem that your environment is not giving you what you need, and you need to fix those problems, and then the drug problems will disappear.
Well, this is a discussion we had, if anyone's interested to go back onto this, with Ismail Lee South, so you can see that, watch that, or listen to that rather, on our YouTube channel, Wellness with Angela and Sophia. We discussed that with Ismail Lee South, who's a youth worker, and yeah, he had he would definitely agree with what you had to say, that the environment plays a huge role, and often when you remove them, give them something to hope for, something to work for, a purpose in life again.
Yes.
And feeling useful, and that they're using their brain and limbs in a good way, then they do actually perform very well and extract themselves from that world.
Yeah. And a big part of this false medication is to do with time effects. So the drug gives an instant relief from the pain, okay, the social pain, whatever it may be. Now every psychoactive drug has a different type of relief from some kind of problem that you feel you have, and so it is a cure, but the timing of it is different. It has a cure in the moment, but long term it has a bad effect. So people don't understand the long term effect, and this is part of understanding the way human beings work. So the different things have different effects. So you have a high from a drug and then there's a low afterwards, and the high and low is a simple way of putting it, but there's lots of different effects. So like, for example, ecstasy makes you feel really friendly and everyone loves you and you love everyone, and then when the down comes, you feel like you're so alone in the world, and it gives you those emotions, all those chemicals in your brain that flow around to make you feel happy or sad or something, and make you feel lonely or gregarious or all these things. They are, you mess with those chemicals, and the body tries to adjust, saying, oh, we're producing too much of this, let's tone down the production of this, and then you don't produce enough when the artificial supply runs out, and it can get to the case where you literally, your body shuts off certain production of certain essential chemicals for your brain or for your psychology, and that's when you're messed up, your brain and you're psychologically messed up as well. So all these psychoactive drugs have these kind of different effects at different times, and it's very complicated for us to understand. We take these things as cures because they are cures in the short term, but there's a more long-term issue which causes us to go way down. So it might even be a simple thing as listening to a piece of music that makes you feel happy. When you're feeling down, you listen to some piece of music that makes you feel happy, and it may do, but only for a short time, because it artificially stimulates that part of you to make you feel happy, and then later on, without the music, the underlying sadness comes back, and it comes back stronger because it hasn't properly been addressed. It's artificially been addressed. So all of these things, they are to do with time effects. So the effect of a drug gives you a benefit in the short term and a harm in the long term. So you have to understand these dynamics. So when I was thinking about my situation where I wasn't studying and I was like, I feel sad, I take this cure. The cure made me feel better, sure, for half an hour. But then after that half an hour, when I was kind of a bit more quiet and he was just sitting there watching a bit of TV and everyone else was just chatting a bit, and I started thinking, I really shouldn't be doing this. This is making me feel quite bad. I think because that's the negative thing, and then I realised that was the real source of my sadness. But another thing I want to say about these different they are chemical effects. So we have in our minds two broad categories of effects. One is chemical and one is electrical. We think in our neurons fire, it's electrical, and that's very quick, and you can be thinking about one thing 1 minute and then you move to something else and you completely forgot what you were thinking about. Whatever I was thinking about, it's completely out of my mind. It's gone now. I'm now thinking about something else, and those thoughts can change very rapidly, and they can deal with situations very rapidly, and because they're electrical, they can be turned off and turned on like a flick of a switch. But chemicals aren't like that, and our emotions are chemical, and there are lots of different types of chemicals involved, but they get released by the body and they swim around the body for a while, and it takes a while to clear them out. So you can be angry with someone for something they did an hour ago, and that anger can get transferred to someone else quite easily, because you're still angry, but it's not because of anything they did, but that emotion is still in your body. So like the advice of the Prophet ﷺ was, if you're angry, then sit down, lie down, remove yourself, take yourself out of the situation. It takes time. It takes time for those chemicals to kind of be cleaned out of your body. In actual fact,
we mentioned that in the past as well. What I've discovered is that there's a direct action of splashing cold water on your nose area. It goes directly into the brain to cool you down. So when the Prophet ﷺ said, go and make wudu because water cools fire, he was absolutely 100% right. There is a direct chemical impact when you do that inside your body. So yes, those advice are generally seeped in science.
I wanted to get a bit into the issue of because there's a particular in the beginning of the Qur'an, and we have these three categories in surat-al-Fatiha, there's those who Allah has made life easy for, الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ, and those who have anger on them, and those who are lost in error. And then they have the whole section at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, and part of this, it says, it talks about mental health, okay, and it's very specific.
You say it's the answer to the dua.
Oh yeah, the first section of the Quran is all answering. It's guidance. The whole Quran is guidance.
Yes,
but the
Al-Fatiha is the dua, and you said that the first 10 to 15 verses of Al-Baqarah is kind of the answer to the dua, isn't it? How to reach that stage.
It explains those three paths more.
Yes.
In detail, because it starts off. It says these are the believers, and then these are the disbelievers, and then it talks about the third group of people, which is generally understood to be the munafiqs, because it says there are people who say they believe but they don't hypocrite. So it's generally understood to be that. But if you follow through that whole section, it ends by saying أُولَئِكَ الَّذِينَ أَشْتَرُوا الضَّلَالَ بِالْهُدَى. Those are the people who've traded guidance for error. So it's all about the dalal, okay? It's all this category of people, and it describes them in many ways. And then it carries on to describe them even more. So the whole category of the dalal, those people in error, it describes lots of different types of error. There's hypocrisy is one type of error, but there's lots of other types of ways you get lost. And it really is important to read these verses, but one of them in particular says, فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ. In their hearts is a disease. And their hearts is you have to understand in the Quran, is the mind and the heart are very closely connected. And the heart actually is it's the body that regulates the chemicals in your body. Okay, the neurotransmitters. I think it produces some of the neurotransmitter drugs itself. Is connected with in the heart somehow. I'm not sure the detail about that, but in principle, it says في قلوبهم مرض فزادهم الله مرضا, and Allah increases the disease. Why? بما كانوا يكذبون, what they deny. Okay, so.
So there's a direct. It's like it's an active process.
It's a feedback being described.
But it's also it's a person doing this. A lot of sort of maybe not completely consciously, but it's an action of them doing this.
Yes.
It's not. They're not a victim of something that they have no control over.
Their action of being kadhab or being in denial is the thing that makes them ill, and Allah increases their illness with their denial. So there's a feedback of denial processes whereby evidence is presented and you just close your eyes, you don't want to look at it. And this is really very important, the whole section they describe. So the people who are believers are those who believe in al-ghaib. Al-ghaib means that's what not yet seen, okay? And there's a whole section there about describing these different things, so that the contrast is made immediately, and we'll go into this a bit later, but we have to pause momentarily.
In the second hour, yes.
So the first category, the believer, people who says, what's the first thing you believe? You believe in al-ghaib. This means you believe that things exist that you can't see or you haven't yet seen. Tomorrow hasn't yet been seen, but we believe it's coming, all right? And that's the archetypal, the ability to think about the future, think about realities that are outside of our immediate sense perception, defines the highest mental faculty. And then it contrasts this with the disbelievers. Initially, this is the two extremes that are given to contrast, and the disbelievers are those, it says, there is a veil on their eyes, and they don't see and they don't hear. It doesn't matter what you say, they won't listen. They're not listening, so they won't hear it. So there's the difference of people who can think about the unseen and can talk about the unseen and believe in things that they can't see, and those who, even when presented evidence right in front of their face, they close their eyes, so I can't see. I don't believe it because I can't see it. Why? Because I've closed my eyes. I'm not looking. I refuse to even look. So this is the contrast drawn between the mentality of the believer and the mentality of the disbeliever, and it's all about being open to discover and to seek truth, and the disbelievers refuse to accept truth that's presented really right in front of them. Doesn't matter what, they've decided not to look. And then there are people who are seeking out the truth, and they'll even believe in things they can't see. They're really looking into the world of the unseen and trying to understand the universe.
Jazakumullah khairan, really, Lamaan. Always fascinating to listen to you, I have to say, and I hope everybody has been enjoying this first half of the show. So we are going to continue after the break and the adhan, inshallah, we'll be talking more about mental health, the specifics of mental health issue. And I have to warn you, there's a little bit of a trigger warning here. If you're going through this issue, or if you have someone in your family, you might find some of this maybe a bit upsetting. We're not going to go into too many details, but I'm just warning you that that we're going to talk about these things and suicide, at least thoughts of suicide, and how we can help. So we hope to keep this show with hopeful and positive, full of tips, inshallah, where we'll resume in about 10-12 minutes, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the Wellness Show. We are talking about youth mental health, their false beliefs, how you can help them to understand themselves better, and for you to understand them better. We are joined today by Lamaan Ball, who's incidentally my husband. We're parents of 4 children, teenagers and young adults. Angela is away in Canada, so she's sending me little messages and I'm reading them out on her behalf. Inshallah, I hope you've enjoyed the first hour where we learned about Lamaan's journey, but also some of the issues that teenagers are faced with, especially with their changing brain, the chemicals that come into play, and also the environmental influences. But now we're going to delve a little bit more into the nitty-gritties of mental health. So there's a little bit of a trigger warning here for anyone who is faced with depression or suicidal thoughts, or if you have anyone in your family or in your immediate environment who's feeling like this may help you. We hope, but however, I should remind you that we are not doctors. We are just here to give you pointers, ideas, make you aware of certain things. Do go and consult a healthcare professional. Do not take any of our comments as advice or as diagnosis or help to treat or cure any of your issues or anybody else's. So we are not taking any responsibility for what you may do as a result of what you listen to, what you hear here, but we hope that inshallah we encourage you to try and explore and improve yourself. This is all the idea of ihsan.
I would just comment on that. This is often said about this, but essentially the point is, if you're going to go and act on a piece of advice from anybody, make sure you've consulted the experts, the people who've actually studied this and have at least have got the orthodox opinion from whoever, rather than just taking another person's opinion. So a sincere person seeks evidence from all the sources that they can get hold of, and especially the most authoritative sources. And
like the Prophet ﷺ did.
Exactly. So if you have a problem that is essentially a medical problem or whatever it is, you speak to the experts and don't take us as the experts when there are people who are more qualified than us.
Definitely. Very, very, very good.
It's a big part of sincerity generally. Is you don't take one person's sort of thing and that's enough to go on. We talked about this a bit earlier about if you take the immediately available information and you don't look properly for the information. So there's a part of the mental health is to look properly for information. That's not to limit yourself to I've heard this, I'm going to do this. Go and look for information. Don't just restrict yourself to what's fed to you.
Yeah, so how common are mental health problems in the UK? So there's a few statistics here. 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem of some kind each year in England. 1 in 6 people report experiencing a common mental health problem like anxiety or depression in any given week in England, again. And there's in any given week in England, you have people feeling mixed anxiety and depression, that's 8 in 100 people. Generalized anxiety disorder, 6 in 100. Post-traumatic stress disorder, 4 in 100. Depression, 3 in 100 people. Phobias, 2 in 100. Obsessive compulsive disorder, 1 in 100. Panic disorder, fewer than 1 in 100 people. And suicidal thoughts of self-harm or self-harm aren't mental health diagnoses in themselves, but they are related to mental health. They're basically a consequence of that issue, that mental health issue. And over the course of someone's lifetime, 1 in 5 people have suicidal thoughts, 1 in 14 people self-harm, and 1 in 15 people attempt suicide. Women are more likely to have suicidal thoughts and make suicide attempts than men, but men are 3 times more likely to take their own lives than women. Basically, they're 3 times more likely to be successful. Because we have that theory, like, isn't it, that Lamaan, that men, when they do something, they just carry through whatever they decided to do. They're like very thorough and putting things, and they.
I think it's a question of why people do things. Sometimes people attempt or appear to attempt suicide, but they're not really fully, because they're actually just wanting someone to stop them. Who's going to stop me? Yeah. Who's going to stop me? Yeah. And they let people know they're about to do it, so that there is a chance that it can be stopped.
So we'll go through some of the signs you can look for if someone is going to attempt. So what you have to note, however, that these numbers I gave you were from a 2014 survey, and many of these figures come only from people who are, and those figures only come from people who are age 16 and over, living in private housing and living in England. So this excludes a lot of vulnerable groups, like people in hospitals, people in prisons, in sheltered housing, homeless or rough sleeping. So obviously the true numbers will be a lot higher than this. Also, what we found is that obviously many of us have noticed this. This has been exacerbated with the lockdown and COVID restrictions that have dragged on since March 2020. We only now in England and maybe Scotland and Wales now live in a perfectly, truly pre-COVID situation in terms of restrictions within our country. Obviously, if you try to travel, you'll be exposed to those, but there's no testing or mask or shielding, self-isolating obligations for anyone in England at the very least. So obviously depression and anxiety because of this situation has more than doubled among teenagers during the pandemic and could be storing up major health problems for the future. So keep an eye on teens around you for the next few years. The decline in teenage mental well-being has been fueled by disruption to their routines, uncertainty, reduced contact with friends, and a fear of catching the virus, obviously. This has prompted an 80% increase in their social media and smartphone use, which is thought to have further contributed to their anxiety. The pandemic has also had a profound effect on sleep pattern, and the average teenagers slept 60% longer during school closures as they got up later in the morning. Adolescence is a critical period in a person's development that can have a bearing on their mental health and quality of life for decades to come. So that's what we were talking about, the chemicals in the brain, and how sometimes adolescents and teenagers don't necessarily react the way they should, because they're just trying to understand their own body, their own brain, and the world outside, and it's quite difficult. There's we know as well that in the brain, the brain's connections get disconnected at the age of 13, about that, and completely finish being reconnected at the age of 21, and that finishes with the prefrontal cortex, which is where all the social interactions is computed and done. So obviously when you have a teenager who looks like you with a blank face and shows absolutely no compassion, no empathy, whatever, don't be too disheartened. It is part of the natural process. Obviously you can encourage them to mitigate a little bit these effects, but it is also part of the fact that the connection's not there. It's just not happening, and it relates to what the Prophet ﷺ said: befriend your child from the age of 14 to 21, because ultimately you should have done already all the work, teaching them right from wrong. Before that, until the age of 7, you were playing with them. 7 to 14, you teach them right from wrong. You make them understand a bit the rules of social life and family life and moral life. But when the age of 14 arrives, there's not much else you can do than just ride that wave by being friends with them, meaning You listen to them, you're empathetic, you guide them. That's what a good friend is. So obviously you're still a parent, you're still allowed to tell them off when they really go off the rails a bit and a bit too. You still have to have your rules, but be a bit mindful that there's certain things, it's not necessarily them being deliberately rebellious, deliberately rude, deliberately lacking in compassion and understanding. It's they sometimes just are a little bit unable. So having said that, we can now continue a little bit on our discussion about general mental health issues and what you have to say about that, Lamaan.
Well, we started to talk about this beginning of surat-al-Baqarah and the contrast between the believers being people who believe in the things that are unseen, and they try and understand what we might call the spiritual realm or the conceptual realm, which is the things that you can't see but you still believe exist. And that in a sense, it's interesting. I always think that in German they have the same word for spiritual and intellectual, which is a bit of an odd thing to say, but they do. It's called geistig, which means ghostly. It's like basically the things that you can't touch, the intangibles. And we believe in things that we can't see and we can't touch, and in particular the future. The future is a big thing we can't see. We don't know what's going to happen. So rather than just immediately reacting to our sort of instinctive behavior right here and right now, we can think about the future. And this, I think, is a very fundamental thing about human beings, which distinguishes us, which is really the whole idea. When we can start to talk about things we cannot see, it's a very crucial thing, because now you have to weigh up the benefits of all these possible futures of yourself, of your family, of the future environment you may be in, against other possible futures. And so it becomes a huge, complicated calculation about what possible things might exist and what possible situations might exist and how we can plan for it. And the very ability to plan is the ability to make a sacrifice, which is to say, I'm going to suffer a little bit now because I know the long-term consequences will be beneficial. And this ability to sacrifice is absolutely essential for mental health. The ability to delay gratification. And this goes back to this issue of time-based benefits. If you take a short-term relief from some problem you feel by taking a drug, it might even just be smoking a cigarette because you feel irritable. You smoke a cigarette, that irritability goes down because that's what nicotine does to you. And then after the effect of it's worn off, you start feeling even more irritable, so you have to have another cigarette, and so these things propagate. You get stuck in these cycles. I wanted to talk a little bit in particular about one cycle that is very hard to unpick if you don't do it right, and I think it's very crucial. Is basically when you assert something negative about yourself, to the point where you're thinking you're a bad person. All right. Now, Islamically, it would say that everything that you can't change about yourself is something Allah will not judge you on. Okay. So you shouldn't be sad about something about yourself that you can't change. Like, I'm too short. Oh, I'm really sad. I wish I was taller. No, you are what you are. Allah gave you that, and He will not judge you harshly for that. Why judge yourself harshly for that? So we have this idea in identity that Islamically, basically anything that you're despairing about or sad about yourself that you cannot change, you shouldn't be, because Allah will not judge you on it, and so you should not judge yourself on it. And that, then what is my identity if I can't be happy about being this, that, and you can't be happy about being a particular race or a particular gender or a particular physical trait that it's just you're born with that. That's in your DNA. You shouldn't elevate that to a status of virtue. What you've been given in terms of your natural biological characteristics, which are unchangeable. You should just say, well, this is not something to be sad about or happy about. This is something Allah has given me. Yeah, it's a test. So I wanted to go into this specific issue about making a negative assertion about yourself. And then feeling bad about yourself. Now, this starts the kind of snowballing feedback effect of depression, and in particular, it's very hard to tell someone they're wrong about that negative statement. So if I say I'm you know, I don't know, I'm like this, I can't change, I'm bad, I'm unhealthy, I don't exercise, whatever it may be.
So often it's I'm unable to succeed. Whatever I do, just
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Yeah. Often.
So I've tried and it doesn't work. And basically, this idea I've tried everything. No, you haven't, because you've tried things for a short time. And often it takes a long time to succeed. You know, I remember my son coming to me at one point asking, like, if I enter this competition, I got a chance of 1 in 100 of winning. But I can enter many times. Is it worth entering many times? And I remember going to him and saying, well, the chance of succeeding is 1 in 100 if you try it once. So if you try twice, what's your chances of succeeding? Just calculate it out. So if it's the same chance, 1 in 100 every time, what's the chances of succeeding if you try twice? And he was like, I don't know, is it still a 1 in 100? I said, no. What's your chance you're going to fail is 99%. So what's the chance you're going to fail both times? Well, it's 99% times 99%, which is slightly less than 99%. And every time you want to say, what's the chance of me failing every single time for many, many, many tries? It's 99% of 99% of 99% of 99%. And each time it gets a little bit lower. So if you tried 100 times, you realize it's quite a lot less than it's not 100% chance you're going to succeed, but it's a good number. 0.99 to the power of 100 is a number that you can calculate on your calculator now, but it is a good fraction. So it goes down to and ultimately, like, if you tried 1,000,000 times, your chance of success at least in one of those attempts is now like 99%. All right. So the more you try something which has a low chance of success, then it may take a lot of tries, but your chance of success increases with every single new try. So try again. And this idea, I've tried everything. Well, I've tried it for how long? Some things take a long time. You have to, if you want to lose weight, let's say, I'm sure you've talked about this on the wellness program a number of times, yeah. But an experiment to lose weight, maybe it should last a year.
Yes.
All right? It's not something you last for a day. Your weight changes. If you drink a litre of water, you've just gained a kilo. All right? And we drink 2 litres, you should drink a couple of litres of water a day, ideally, but that means your weight fluctuates by a couple of kilos every day. All right? And even with a fairly strict diet, you expect to lose a couple of kilos at most every week or two. All right?
It's better.
So the fact that your weight fluctuates a lot means you have to give it time, and this is about, these things take a lot of time. So anyway, someone who has this negative idea about themselves, if you tell them they're wrong, you're criticizing them, and then they think I'm bad because you're telling me I'm wrong. So their confidence, their self-confidence also takes a hit when you tell them they're wrong. And if you tell them they're right in their negative assertion about themselves, you're also telling them they're a bad person. So you're either telling them they're a bad person because you say, yes, I agree, you have this problem, you're bad in this way, or you're a bad person, or you're unable, you're incompetent, or whatever it is. If you confirm that incompetence or that negative sense about themselves, then you're asserting it. And if you criticize them and tell them they're wrong, then that also is a negative to them. So you have to find a way they will interpret a criticism as an evidence that they're a bad person, and they're for feeling bad about themselves. So you have to say in positive ways that, look, you can do this, look, you can do this, look, you can do this, not saying you're wrong about saying you can't do it.
Yeah.
But this I can and I can't.
Someone who's depressed basically has reached a point where they're often just unable to even physically move, and you have to take it to a very, very low level to say, you can't do anything, but you're sitting, so you got up, you are breathing, you're able to breathe, you can get up physically, there's nothing wrong with you physically, you can get up and go to the sink and make yourself a cup of tea.
But also they're past. If you like, I remember my someone in my family, I won't say who, because we try and keep things a little bit distinct, had some sort of a depression phase, and I was around at the time, and essentially they were saying, oh, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do anything, and asking other people to just do everything for them, and being completely kind of doing nothing. And this is what they used to call, and I think that my father had this, a nervous breakdown. Essentially, you just stop. And I think what happens there is you basically, you don't trust yourself to decide. You've made some big mistake in life. You think you've got it all wrong. I thought I was so right and I'm so wrong, so I don't trust myself to make decisions about anything, and so you feel I don't know what's the right way of doing it. It's like you're a train going down a track. Really, you're charging down this track, and then you suddenly realize it's the wrong track. So what did you do? So you just stop. Yeah. So one of the things I was saying is like, oh, you can do this. You're excellent at this. Look, you got better GCSE results than me. You are quite capable of doing all sorts of things, and just telling them all the things they can do. So using the past and focusing on past evidence, and look, you can do this. Look, you can do this. You're quite capable. You're much better than me at doing this, and you're much better at me at doing that. And focusing on all the good things they can do, and encouraging them, but without an air of criticism that they're bad. So it's all about asserting the good things that they can do, that kind of get them out of that mentality and say, yes, I can do things, and opens up their eyes. Because this thing about this is actually, when you say a negative thing about yourself, it's an assertion. It's still a positive assertion. It is an assertion which is a positive. Assert is to be positive. So it is a positive statement about a negative thing. All right. Yeah. And the assertion itself, when you say a state of fact about anything, that can become arrogant if you think that's true and you won't listen to the counter evidence. All right. So if you say, I can't do this, and someone tells you, yes, you can. Okay. The assertion and the confidence of your assertion in your negative statement is a really evil form of arrogance, an evil form of saying, I'm no better than you. Okay, and this is actually in the Quran, and we talk about the shaitan said, I won't bow down to Adam because I'm better than him. Okay, so this is an arrogance. Okay, this is kibr. This is the arrogance which is at the core of a lot of sins, is this assertion that you know something and you're not going to listen to evidence, which is again comes back to this idea of the kafirun having like veils over their eyes, and they can't see and they can't hear and they can't, they've blocked their senses because they're arrogant about what they assert that they know, that I know enough now, I don't need to look any further, I have closed my mind. My mind is closed to new information. And that arrogance about your own knowledge about yourself. No one knows me like myself. I'm a unique person. No one else knows what I've gone through. No one else knows my difficulties, my struggles, and I know and you don't. So that stops conversation as well. It means you can't tell them anything about themselves. You can't tell them, they know themselves, they know what they can do, they can't be dissuaded. And this is part of the problem with depression, is that people are arrogant in their assertions about negative things about themselves, so much that they won't listen to counter evidence, and it comes in the idea of despair as well, which Allah talks about in the Quran. It says, don't despair, Allah's mercy is near. Okay, and when we despair, it is an act of arrogance. It's a strange thing to say, but because you think despairing people are super, they're saying, I don't know anything. No, they are asserting, I can't do this, or I can't find an answer, and I've tried everything. This is all assertions which are arrogant in and of themselves. And depression and despair is actually an arrogant position about your negative statements. You're saying, I'm so confident in my negative statements about myself that no one can persuade me, and I'm not listening to anybody. That's why it's sometimes very hard to get through to these people, is that they have this arrogance about their negativity.
It's hard to break through. We're going to have a short break, and we will continue to finish off on this issue and talk a little bit more about how, in more practical terms, how you can help yourself and help others who are faced with these negative thoughts.
Oh, people.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're just finishing off for the last part of the wellness show today. This is Sophia. I'm on my own. Angela is in Canada, sending me her comments and questions. by text, and we're with Lamaan talking about wellness, mental health, especially in the youth, but also anybody who's faced with struggling with depression, how you can get out of that negative thinking loop. So you've explained to us a lot what goes on. So if you want to move on a little bit now, talking to us on how we can get out of that negative loop, what maybe other people can do to help.
Well, there's a couple of things that I want to kind of connect up to verses in Qur'an about this. We talk a lot about the time effect. So some things take a long time. Emotions come and go in this longer time than thoughts, for example. But some things take a long time. People take a long time to develop. Their bodies take a long time to change. And their minds take time to change. So we have, of course, famously surat-al-Asr, which says we have to encourage each other. We have to believe, do good, useful work, and encourage each other in towards the truth, but with patience. So it takes time to get through. Sometimes you might think, this has not worked because there's no immediate response. But sometimes you plant a seed and it takes a long time to grow into a proper plant, and the children growth is a lot like this. You put a little seeds in where you can and hoping that something will grow out of it. So sometimes they take time. But there is also a couple of other verses that come to mind that I think were particularly important. One is a verse where it talks about in surat-al-Balad that the steep path, the path you to take, is one of the good things to do, and if you do them, you become min alladhina I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it says those who encourage patience and encourage marhama, which is compassion. So patience and compassion are vital kind of things that have to go together. You can be patient with someone, but the point of being patient with them is you're compassionate. You understand how it takes time. You understand that things they're not immediate, and that it takes. You have to encourage them to be patient and encourage each other to have compassion for one another. And another verse, in particular in this relation to the family and children and so on, is there's a verse in the Quran, it's quite a strong verse, which is quite important. It says, among your wives and your children, you have enemies. I think this translated, I don't know how to check the translation on that, but it's very strong. It says they have enemies. And it says, but if you are patient and you overlook, then Allah will be patient and merciful to you. And this is a very important principle in Islam, is we are patient and forgiving to others so that God is patient and forgiving to us. This is a very important underlying ethical principle. I mean, it's a lot. You could have a whole show on this one principle, which is as you have in the Christian and Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So it's basically we forgive others around us. We should behave towards others with the kindness and mercy and forgiveness and compassion the way we would want God to show that to us, and that's very crucial. So I think these are kind of important points which we take from the Quran about how to deal with these things. A lot of it's about giving that example to your children, so that this is we show that compassion and patience, and say, well, okay, this is the truth. You may not accept it now. It might be right, but I'll be patient when it's the right time. And one of the things I remember from my stepfather when I was in my teenage years, dealing with all the issues around these things, and my stepbrother was saying, how should you treat this agnostic stepson, and how should he be treated? And he said, well, we ask Allah to guide him and be patient. And I think it's a wonderful answer, because
instead of
being judgmental and saying, he's a terrible person, da, 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 da.
I think this comes from fear as well, from parents and adults generally, or even people around, when you're faced with a belief that you don't quite understand yourself, or is challenging for you because it goes against what you believe in and you've been taught, and what's right, and what Allah will be pleased with you. But if you hear someone saying these things and like, oh my God, just even hearing it, you feel like you've done something wrong. don't panic. It's okay. The best reaction is to, as you say, just
it's often
accompany
that's
the
actually
person
out.
and
That
don't-
panic is again out of your arrogance that you think you know everything. The best
Or that you have
response,
control
the
over
best
things, yeah.
response on a lot of these things. You know, Allah says, you know, if He wanted, He could have made everyone Muslim.
Yeah.
But He doesn't want that. He wants people to seek truth. He wants people to search for themselves, and if parents have the attitude of I know everything and their children has to just take them, if they come up with questions that they don't know the answer to, that's a challenge to them, and they go, oh no, then they won't respect my authority, or whatever. And they say, well, the best response is to say, well, I don't know everything, and not have that arrogance, and say, well, I don't know the answer to this question, I'll go and find out if I can. And it's the same thing when you're giving dawah, when you're trying to explain things to people. There are people that are going to come up with questions which you've never heard of before. Take these as opportunities to go and learn, all right? Don't treat it as a threat to your argument, you know. So this thing I don't know. And this is part of faith, really, is that we believe in the things that we don't know. Unseen are, by definition, unknown, in a way. We don't know them quite in the same confidence as things that are right in front of us. But we have confidence that Allah will provide from, you know, that there is good to be achieved, and we may not have found it yet, but we believe that there is, you know, the good. You know, when we get to I think another verse in the Quran talks about when you get to Judgment Day, you say, indeed Allah's promise has been proven true. It's then you find out fully that yes, there is a Judgment Day, yes, there is accountability, yes, there are rewards and punishment, and my work was not in vain. Yeah. So we believe in the things that we don't know, and that we should be, that there are confidence that Allah will, you know, provide justice ultimately for us, and for everyone, give them rewards. So if you have difficulties, you say, or you are faced with a difficult question, you shouldn't say, well, this is the answer. So, well, maybe I think it's this, but you know, other people I might be able to find a better answer for you, and go and look into it. And I've always that openness to go and look for better answers, I think it's very important. I mean, you can go to the issues of science, and the idea behind science is question everything. You know, just keep asking questions, keep looking, keep searching for the truth, and that's what Allah wants. Which brings me nice and neatly back to the first principle, which is the kind of the purpose of life is a test for us. It's a test. Do we learn? Do we seek the truth, or are we happy to live with our minds with all these contradictions and lies that we somehow still accept, instead of actually saying, no, let's work out what's really true here, and push aside the lies. And Allah says in the Quran also that when truthhood comes, falsehood is destroyed, and what remains is true, which sounds like very much a description of the nature of reality, not just about life, but about reality. The reality is about the truth becoming manifest. It's about what survives, what lasts is that which is beneficial to people, which is good to people. People forget the lies. They've gone. They're destroyed, and no one remembers or cares about them, because they're not relevant to us. What remains in our minds, what remains in our lives, is what is beneficial to us.
Yeah, really fascinating, and I hope our listeners are taking notes and trying to think about, maybe refer back to their own lives, maybe how you dealt with a situation, with a challenge, or with your own mental state, and sort of try and see if you can change some of the beliefs. Sometimes it's not, you don't have to be depressed, or you don't have to be like in a terrible mental state to think sometimes negative thoughts. You know, you've been annoyed by someone, and instead of getting out of it fairly quickly, you kind of mull over things and add fuel to the fire, and this is, you know, all part of this process of just confirming your own beliefs about certain things. And just be open and always try and find a positive in whatever happens. And again, this principle in Islam about ihsan, of improving oneself. You can be considering yourself quite a balanced person and compassionate, I think, but we can always improve ourselves. So again, my little trigger warning here, we're talking about mental health, depression, and also suicide attempt and thoughts. So if you feel like this, do be warned. and also that we are not doctors. So anything that we may mention or suggest are not a diagnosis or ways to treat or cure. Just go to a healthcare professional who can help you or help the person you see some signs. But I'd like to kind of go a little bit more on details about the mental health issues that you can recognize in people, and remember that suicide is not a mental health in itself. It's a manifestation, physical manifestation of that mental health issue. It's potentially a serious consequence of a mental disorder that, you know, could be coming from depression, bipolar disorder, could be PTSD, anything, schizophrenia, substance use as well, you know, drug use, anxiety, everything can lead to suicidal thoughts. And one way of noticing maybe around you if someone has serious thoughts of committing suicide, and some of the behavior that they'll have would be severe sadness and moodiness, unexpected rage, hopelessness as well, feeling that they're just unable to do anything. Like we talked a lot with Lamaan about that, hopelessness about the future, with little expectation that circumstances can improve. They also often have sleep problems, but also sudden calmness, like after a period of depression, moodiness, all of a sudden that's it, it's kind of, they've come to the conclusion this is what they have to do, so they become really, really calm, a bit detached, I suppose, from reality around them. Withdrawal, choosing to be alone, avoiding friends, a loss of interest and of pleasure in activities that they previously enjoyed. So it's like really sort of change, something's really, really odd. Changes in personality or appearance. They might suddenly become less concerned about their personal appearance and become a bit more shabby and less sort of groomed. They could also have dangerous or self-harmful behaviors. It could also come from a recent trauma or life crisis, so be aware of that. Major change in relationship, major illness, loss of a job, serious financial problems that can really lead, especially in men, because they feel the brunt a lot more, as naturally feeling that they should provide for people around them, or they're like in great debt and they feel that they can't get over them. And in fact, there was I met a couple who were campaigning about gambling awareness, and their son had committed suicide and he was in huge debt and he just didn't tell anyone. He just felt so ashamed. So if you're aware of someone who had gone that route, and be aware and maybe help them, support them, guide them. So when someone is very serious about committing suicide, they would start making preparations. They put their personal business in order, for instance, visiting friends, family members, giving away personal possessions, making a will, cleaning up their room or home. They might write a note before doing this. They might actually post it on social media. Obviously, in some countries, they might, start purchasing substances that could help them towards, substances or weapons that could help them to achieve this. And finally, they could also be threatening or talking about suicides. So 50 to 75% of those considering suicide will give someone, a friend or a relative, a warning sign. And often this is like we were talking about, leaving the door open. Please help me. It's like throwing a little bit, kind of please throw me a rope to hold on to. This is what I'm thinking of doing, but they're leaving the door a bit open for someone to, maybe a final call, please come and help me. So be aware of that. It might not be an outright threat, but they might be kind of talking unusually about death or things like, it would be better if I wasn't here. But not everyone who is considering suicide will say so, and not everyone who threatens suicide will follow through with it. So every threat of suicide should be taken seriously. And there are some websites and helplines that you can contact. So you have obviously the most obvious one in the UK is in the NHS. You have Mind. You also have the Women's Helpline, children helplines as well that you can contact. All of those can be found on the internet. There's lots of articles as well from websites like Very Well Mind. and others that can help you to do this, to find out more about these things. But one of the ways to cope with depression in general is to develop a strong support network. And we mentioned that earlier, Lamaan, because it helps with challenging your own beliefs, but also it's the physical connection with people. This is why the pandemic impacted us so much, because we couldn't have even hugs, physical, that have a physical impact on you, releasing happy hormones in your body when you hug someone. And now we found it affects your gut when you hug someone, and the gut is another brain which also releases things in your body. So this is really important. Improve your sleep. Obviously, if you sleep well, you're less likely to have negative thoughts in the day. You can think more clearly. Develop good nutrition. Again, it's another way of helping yourselves. Create a wellness toolbox, so anything or anyone that can help you, a doctor or friends. Reduce your stress levels. I mean, this is obviously easy to say, but you can sometimes find ways to reduce your stress levels. Avoid procrastination, so make a list of things you want to do and try and follow through. That will give you the positive feedback that you've achieved something, you feel happy about yourself. And Lamaan talked a lot about how to learn to curb negative thinking and keep up with household chores. Having again, there's studies have shown if you have a house that's not cluttered around yourself and your environment is not cluttered, it's fairly tidy, it helps your brain to think clearly. It makes you calmer. So it's really, really important if you can do that. You can ask for help as well. Ask a friend, come and help me, just sort out my house a bit, or let's do something sociable, and then we'll have a nice meal or a nice cup it together, and this helps. And if Angela was here, she would say, don't have too much sugar. Angela, do you agree with that? Don't have too much sugar. Sugar affects how you think, how you feel, because obviously you go through ups and downs in your sugar level in your blood, and you can feel really drained during the day, and that doesn't help you think clearly. But even sugar directly affects your thinking. So do use sugar replacement that are healthy, like honey or agave syrup or other things that not artificial as much as possible. So Lamaan, do you have anything you want to conclude on? We have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, a couple of things. This sort of opens up whole kind of ideas.
That's really for another show.
But you talked about loneliness. One of the key things, sort of in my journey, I suppose, if you call it that, was that I kind of isolated myself from my family at one point, just thinking I don't want to be under the pressure from my family to do whatever. And I realized that when I did so, I essentially made myself lonely. And in that process, the chemicals that were flowing around my mind, emotions that were going around, I was living in Germany in a flat on my own, in a summer job, and that was kind of at the moment I realized actually that to be able to think clearly and have no sort of have kind of pure objectivity is like it's not quite right. You are most able to think clearly when you're not worried about the way you feel, about all the situations, about all the things biologically you need. So there is the fitra, you see, in Islam we have balance and have everything is there. It's like the rat when it moved out, I basically put myself into that kind of rat cage of a solitary confinement to avoid the social pressure. But actually we need that social environment, we need people around us, we need to have those relationships, those communications to be healthy mentally.
This is the Prophet ﷺ encourages us to be surrounded by Muslims. And why? Because obviously if you are surrounded by people who are good morally, with good thinking, you're less likely to think in a bad way.
Yes, and you people need that attention from each other. I mean, the basic, not just people, all creatures, all social creatures need that social attention. They need people to see them, to not threaten them, and to be kind to them. So that is part and parcel of our mental health is being in environments where we have our needs met, social needs, environmental needs, even sexual needs, and getting married and things. These are essential parts of a healthy situation. Once you have all these things around you, then you are more able to think clearly, not less.
And this concludes our show. Thank you so much. May Allah bless you and continue to give you a good brain to analyze all of these things, and come again on our show, inshallah. I'm sure we have so much more we can talk about. You gave me an idea about a future show about forgiveness. We had talked about gratitude, so that's another interesting show. You can listen back on our YouTube channel, Wellness with Angela and Sophia, if you want to find out more about this and how this can help you mentally. I hope you enjoyed, and inshallah we will come back next week. We'll be talking about movement, good movement, inshallah. So this is where we conclude our show, inshallah. Have a lovely week. May Allah bless you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.